At parliamentary oversight under the spotlight today at the Commission of Inquiry into State Capture. Senior reporter Tamale Mahlaudi joins me now in studio on those proceedings at the State Capture Inquiry. Let's go a little bit earlier, Tamale. Good evening, by the way, and thanks for joining us.
Good evening, Tam.
With the former chairperson of the Transport Portfolio Committee, Dept Magadzi, who is now the Deputy Minister, actually, of Transport. And there was a point where the Chief Justice really was disappointed, couldn't even hold back to express his disappointment. What was that fallout about?
Well, that fallout essentially, and the disappointment from Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, was about Dept Magadzi's insistence that in terms of what was expected of parliamentarians, her understanding was that parliamentarians effectively there was nothing wrong with them going with what the party line is all about. So effectively, in terms of the oversight of portfolio committees, her understanding was that if there was a particular party line that had to be followed, there was nothing untoward, even in the face of allegations or evidence that pointed to undue processes being followed or oversights being overlooked, or even the legislation being trounced upon in terms of contracts being awarded unduly at SOEs and various other state interests of business, that there was nothing untoward as far as the parliamentary oversight committees and members of parliament voting with the party line.
Yeah. Did we hear anything new around the 51 billion rand contract that was issued to the Guptas, except for what we already know in the public domain?
Well, nothing new really, but just about what was the oversight committee's role in trying to block that particular contract when it was discovered that the contract was effectively renewed over and over several times after it was initially awarded to Bosasa. And once it was awarded to Bosasa, what processes were followed, whether it went to tender again or whether it was just a rubber stamping of that particular process. This is the first time when we actually get an insight that despite various concerns raised about Bosasa's links to the Guptas and Bosasa having been the beneficiary of that contract without having tendered, and those processes not having been followed, due processes having been followed, that this was then just rubber stamped, and oversight committee in parliament did nothing about it. Yeah. This was the question when Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo said, when you look at the cost of this contract, even though it has come to light that Bosasa as a company did in fact dole out the services to the particular institutions, correctional services being the one in the spotlight here in terms of the catering services, it's the manner in which the contract was then entered into and extended without having to gone out to tender. So she was saying that as far as that is concerned, there was nothing untoward, and even Vincent Smith saying that before he came in, this contract was entered into, and basically during his tenure, all that was done was that the contract was then just rubber stamped and extended.
Was he in favor though of the extension of the contract as the chairperson of the portfolio committee?
As the chairperson of the portfolio committee, he says that there were concerns about the various contracts being extended and being extended in the way that they were. And he says that as the chairperson of the portfolio committee, he did try, and others to try and advise Parliament. And this is where the issue of what exactly, in terms of influence and in terms of powers, the portfolio committee has at its disposal. And what we have discovered, according to Vincent Smith's understanding, is that the portfolio committee only has an advisory role. Yeah. Essentially, it advises the executive to say, we believe that this particular contract might have to go out to tender for various reasons, etc., etc. And then it is up to the executive whether they go ahead with it or not. And he says that certainly he does not see a failure on behalf of the oversight committee in terms of running out its responsibilities and doing what it was meant to do. Yeah. Now, when questioned about that later, Mr. Smith admitted that the key challenge where it could have failed, having seen that these contracts were effectively ballooned and they were just being rubber stamped, and no due processes were followed according to legislation and according to what is required by prescripts of law, he says that this was due to the fact that the portfolio committee is hamstrung by a lack of resources, and that when they are looking at these particular matters, They only have so many legal experts at their disposal to look at numerous amount of matters. So this was another matter that was hamstringing them. So this issue of being accountable and being only an advisory body and not having the powers to hold the executive to account, and the issue of resources is what he was pinning down.
That's an interesting view. We are hamstrung by resources, but also the fact that we just really advisors, although they really overstate their role as having to play oversight. Yes. It's a vast difference, though, to what Dikeledi Magadzi says. You say, well, I'm not there on my own accord, but I'm here because the party brought me here, and therefore I toe the party line. Did Vincent Smith venture into that debate of towing the party line?
Well, Vincent Smith did well to steer clear of that particular debate, to say that essentially what the Oversight Committee role, in terms of towing the party line, he moved it more to the issue of the resources and the issue of not having enough influence, and saying that all they have to do is provide oversight, and essentially they're an advisory body to the executive, which means then if you have members of the oversight committees, towing the party line, you'll have the executive telling them essentially what needs to happen. And when they're supposed to then impress onto the executive that this is a problem, they do not have anything more. They do not have any weapons, so to speak, at their disposal to make sure that they can enforce when they do see that there is a real problem.
What does he say are the recommendations? Because clearly he's saying the way in which the system is set up right now is a problem. It doesn't allow for that kind of oversight. For example, there was an SIU report, right, that was given to them around Bosasa to say, hold on, these fellows are problematic, right? Yet he felt, look, well, the SIU will continue with those processes. I think that's what he said. Yes. He thought those would be the processes of the SIU. They'll take them to conclusion. Yes. It's not something that they spoke about in Parliament per se.
Yes.
But how did he feel the system could be fixed?
Well, he feels like when the issue of the SIU report specifically comes in, as a parliamentary committee, yes, they are aware of the report, and their understanding is that that report will then be debated and then will be carried forward, either be implemented or it will then be left up to the executive to decide what to do in terms of implementing the recommendations of the report. Now, with the Oversight Committee being aware of the report and having that understanding, one gets the impression that perhaps they felt that, okay, the report is there, and therefore their role and duty is to watch what the executive will do and then take their lead from there. Whereas one would have to question whether their role was not effectively to keep hounding the executive and reminding them that at every turn, and this is another thing that Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo raises, this report was there, and this report was there for several years, and some of its findings and recommendations are very, very critical in terms of what needs to be done as a remedial measure. However, if the portfolio committee is not following up, then how is the executive expected then to remember and to basically ensure who's gatekeeping them, who's making sure that accountability is held? And this is one of the questions that the portfolio committee, as one of its oversight responsibility, has failed in.
Yeah. Let's go back to Dikeledi Magadzi and the testimony around PRASA and the financials of PRASA and irregular expenditure continuing to go up, and the Auditor General flagging that irregular expenditure. Did Dikeledi Magadzi eventually concede that they failed in their oversight role as the portfolio committee?
Well, she conceded that they could have done better in their oversight role as a portfolio committee. But then again, with all the irregularities and expenditure, she acknowledged when Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo pointed out, and the evidence leader indeed pointing out that how could this be allowed to balloon so much in a short space of time when you look at how much the expenditure ballooned, irregular expenditure at that, going against the legislation, and yet you have the oversight capacity. And she said that admittedly they could have done better, not giving much more than that. Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo also expressing frustration at the time, saying that, looking back, you do say you could have done better, but are you admitting that more is expected of parliamentary oversight role, more than towing the party line from the oversight committee? And she says, well, we are there on the ticket of the party, very consistent in following that, saying that we're not there of our own accord. Therefore, we have to, at every turn, to make sure that we stay consistent to the party line and not vote against the party.
Senior reporter Tamala Mahlaudia, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for joining us.